I was in the middle of resealing a window frame in the garage when my phone rang. It was a Saturday in late October, the kind of cold that arrives in Kelowna before you're ready for it. The mountains already showing white at the top. The number wasn't saved, a local area code, but not one I recognized. I almost let it go. I was wearing gloves and the phone was balanced on the workbench, and it would have been easy to just leave it. But something made me pull off the right glove and answer. "Is this Malcolm?" The voice on the other end was a woman, mid-50s maybe, measured. A little careful. "It is," I said. "My name is Carol Hendricks. I'm the contractor your daughter hired to renovate the basement suite at your wife's old property on Lakeshore. I'm sorry to bother you on a weekend, sir, but I need you to come over here today if you can. And I'd rather you come by yourself. Don't bring your daughter or anyone else, just you." I stood in the garage with the phone pressed against my ear, and I didn't say anything for a moment. Outside, the maple at the end of the driveway had gone fully orange. Everything looked the way it does in late October in the Okanagan. That particular golden amber that would have made my wife reach for her camera. My wife's name was Elaine. She passed away 11 months before that phone call. She had been 54 years old. The doctor said it was a cardiac event, rapid and unexpected, in a woman with no prior history of heart disease. We had been married for 28 years. The property on Lakeshore had been Elaine's before we met. Her parents had left it to her, and she had kept it, rented it as a suite, managed it herself with the kind of quiet competence she brought to everything. After she died, I had let the rental lapse. I couldn't face dealing with tenants and leases and maintenance goals. My daughter had eventually persuaded me to renovate and relist it to at least let the asset generate income again. She had found Carol, someone from the local trades directory, and had arranged the work herself to take it off my plate. I had met Carol once, briefly, at the start of the job. She had seemed practical and no-nonsense in the way that contractors either are or aren't, and she was. "Come alone," she had said. Something in the way she said it stayed very flat and deliberate, not urgent exactly. More like a person who had already decided what needed to happen and was not going to be talked out of it. I told my brother, who was visiting for the weekend, that something had come up at Elaine's property. He asked if he should come. I told him no, just a contractor question. I'd be back in an hour. The drive to Lakeshore took 20 minutes. Carol was standing outside the side entrance when I pulled up, her work jacket on, hands folded in front of her. She waited until I had walked all the way over before she spoke. "I found something," she said, "in the wall behind the old drywall in the back utility room. Before I say anything else, I want you to come see it the way I found it." She led me downstairs. The suite smelled of old carpet and concrete dust. Carol had pulled a section of drywall away from the interior wall of the utility room, exposing the insulation behind it. She had a work light set up. She pointed to a gap between two studs, about chest height. There was a metal document box there, the kind you'd find at Staples, fireproof with a combination lock built into the lid. It was sitting on a short piece of timber someone had screwed horizontally between the studs as a shelf. It wasn't placed casually. It was placed deliberately, the way you'd store something you didn't want found by accident but did want found eventually. "I set that bracket myself," Carol said quietly. "Or no. Someone set that bracket. I didn't touch the box. I knew the combination. Elaine used the same 6-digit sequence for anything that needed a code. Our wedding anniversary. Month, day, year. I crouched down, turned the dial, felt the latch give. Inside the box there was a thin manila folder, a USB drive, and an envelope with my name on the front in her handwriting. I sat down on the cold concrete floor of the utility room. Carol didn't say anything. She adjusted the work light slightly and then moved to the doorway and stood with her back to me and gave me the room. I've thought about that gesture many times since. It cost her nothing, and it was exactly right. I didn't open the envelope that day. I thanked Carol, told her to pause the work until I'd had a chance to go through what I'd found. She said she understood, that she'd invoice me for the days already completed and wait to hear from me. She asked, once, if I was all right. I said I genuinely wasn't sure. I brought the box home and set it on the dining room table, the one Elaine had picked out at a shop in Penticton the year we moved into this house. I made a pot of coffee. I sat across from the box for a long time before I opened it again. Elaine had hidden this. She had built a shelf and placed this box on it and sealed a wall over it. She had hidden it in the property no one visited regularly, the property that was hers before I was. She had left my name on the envelope in her own handwriting. She had wanted it found, but not easily, not by anyone. By me, eventually, when the time was right. My wife was not a dramatic woman. She did not do things for effect. If she had done this, she had done it for a reason. I opened the folder first. Inside were printed pages organized with paper clips, bank statements, a record of our joint savings account going back nearly 2 years, several transfers highlighted in yellow marker, amounts ranging from $3,000 to $18,000. Beside each one, in her careful handwriting, a date and a question mark. The transfers were all described the same way in the bank record: management fee, pre-authorized. Elaine had also printed what appeared to be a page from an original contract, then a scan of our copy of the same contract. I set them side by side on the table. The original contract had a clause on page 8. Our copy went from page 7 directly to page 9. The pages weren't missing. They had been renumbered so it wasn't obvious. But the content wasn't there. The contract was with a man named Bernard Ashton. He had been our financial planner for 9 years. We had met him through Elaine's colleague at the school where she worked. Someone who had spoken highly of him, said he was honest and careful with retirement accounts. We had trusted him with the bulk of our RRSPs and our non-registered savings. I went to the filing cabinet we kept in the spare room and found our original copy of the onboarding contract. Elaine had filed everything meticulously, labeled and dated. I found the contract in under 2 minutes. She had been right. Our copy had no page 8, the clause authorizing management fees at Bernard's discretion. The clause that would have legitimized every one of those transfers was simply absent from what we had signed, or from what we had been given after signing. I could not immediately tell which. I added up the highlighted transfers. The total was just under $74,000. I went back to the folder and kept reading. About 2/3 of the way through, the documents shifted from financial records to something else. There was a printed email chain, Elaine's address at the top, Bernard's below. The first email was from Elaine, dated about 16 months before she died. It was polite and specific. She had noticed a discrepancy in the account summary. She listed the transfers and asked for clarification on the authorization. Bernard's reply came 3 days later. He explained that the fees were industry standard and had been disclosed at onboarding. He thanked her for reaching out and encouraged her to call if she had further questions. Elaine had replied again 3 weeks after that, more detailed this time. She had gone back through their original paperwork and could not locate the authorization clause. She asked whether he could send her a copy of the signed document with that clause included. Bernard had replied once more. This time his tone had shifted slightly. He mentioned that contracts of this nature were complex documents and that he was happy to walk her through the relevant sections at their next meeting. He mentioned that he hoped she was taking care of herself given the stress of managing a rental property alongside her teaching work. He mentioned that he had been meaning to follow up about some supplementary investment options he thought might suit them. He had not sent the clause. Elaine's response was 3 words: "I'll be in touch." After that, the email chain stopped. The next pages in the folder were not emails. They were handwritten notes on loose leaf. In her handwriting, a different kind of writing than her usual. Tighter, more pressured, the letter smaller than normal. The first note was dated 14 months before she died. Bernard gave me a bottle of wine from a local winery and a package of what he called curated wellness supplements at our October meeting. He said a naturopath friend had recommended them for cardiac support. He said his wife used the same ones. I thanked him and didn't think anything of it. Started taking them that evening. I set the paper down. I remembered the supplements. Small white capsules in a dark glass jar with a paper label. Elaine had been particular about them, had kept them on her side of the bathroom counter. She had mentioned once that they were helping her sleep. I had not thought about them since she died. I had not thought to think about them. I kept reading. 7 weeks after that first note, I'd been feeling strange. Tired in a way that's different from teaching tired. Heart has been fluttery on and off. Made an appointment with my doctor. Then, 4 weeks later, Dr. Anand says my ECG shows some early irregularity. He's not alarmed, says it can be common in women my age, wants me to monitor and come back in 3 months. He asked about stress. I didn't mention the supplements. I don't know why I didn't mention the supplements. Then, I looked up the supplements. The brand isn't listed anywhere online. The jar has no lot number. There is no company at the address on the label. I stopped taking them 2 weeks ago. I don't feel better yet, but I'm going to wait. Then a single line, written harder than the others, the pen pressing deep into the paper. Bernard brought the gift. Bernard gave me pills with no traceable origin. Bernard is taking our money. I am not crazy. I got up from the table. I walked to the kitchen window and stood there for a while looking out at the backyard. Elaine's bird feeders were still there. I had kept filling them. I didn't know why. Some kind of maintenance grief. Keeping the things going because stopping felt like a decision I wasn't ready to make. I went back to the table. The notes continued. She had not gone to the police immediately because she said she needed to be certain. She had written, "If I'm wrong about this, I will have destroyed a man's reputation and damaged relationships that took years to build. I need more than suspicion." She had been trying to get one of the capsules tested. The notes described her contacting 2 different labs. The first said they didn't handle that kind of analysis. The second said they could run a general screen, but it would take several weeks. She had sent a sample in. She had not received the results before she died. The results were not in the folder. The final note was dated 9 days before she passed. The handwriting was harder to read than the others, which I had to look at for a long time before I understood why. She had written it in a hurry. Or she had written it when she was not feeling well. Malcolm will find this when they open up the suite. Or Nadia will find it. If it's Nadia, I hope she reads this and calls her father before she reads any further. There is enough in this folder to go to the police. Do not go to Bernard alone. Do not confront him. Take this to a lawyer first and let the lawyer decide what goes to who. I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner. I was trying to make sure before I did. I love you. Take care of Nadia. She worries too much and she gets that from me, and I love her for it. Our daughter's name is Nadia. She is 31. She had been the one to hire Carol, to organize the renovation, to do the practical work of dealing with the property because she knew I couldn't. She had been the one who found this, in a sense, without knowing it. I did not tell Nadia that night. I wanted to read everything first. I wanted to understand what I was looking at before I brought it to anyone. The USB drive had 2 things on it: a scanned copy of every document in the folder and a video file. I didn't have anything that could play it on easily. I drove to Nadia's apartment the next morning. I told her I had found some things at her mother's property that I needed help going through and that it was related to some financial accounts. She asked me if I was okay. I told her I was working on it. She set up her laptop without asking more questions. She has her mother's instinct for when to wait. The video was 41 minutes long. Elaine had set her phone on a shelf in Bernard's office, visible but unremarkable among the files and samples he kept there, and recorded the entire meeting. I want to describe what was on that recording accurately because accuracy matters here. Bernard did not confess. He was not the kind of man who would confess. He was careful with his words in the way that people who have practiced a specific kind of careful are careful. When Elaine raised the missing contract pages, he said he couldn't speak to what had been in her copy, but that he was confident the disclosure had been made. When she presented the printed email exchange and asked him directly why he had not provided the authorization clause she had specifically requested, he said there must have been a miscommunication with his assistant and that he would look into it. He said this in a tone that suggested he would absolutely not look into it. Then Elaine said quietly that she had sent one of the supplement capsules to a lab for analysis and that she was waiting on results. Bernard was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I'd be careful about making decisions based on incomplete information, Elaine. Labs can produce all kinds of results depending on how you frame the question." Elaine said, "I'm not making decisions. I'm waiting for information." Bernard said, "You've clearly been under a lot of stress. I've been worried about you." The hard irregularity, managing everything with the rental, teaching full-time. It adds up. Elaine said, "It does." Then she picked up her purse and left. That was how the recording ended. Her walking out, Bernard watching her go. There were 4 seconds on the recording after she mentioned the lab results before he spoke. I listened to those 4 seconds several times. The sound in the office was ambient, faint HVAC hum, the creak of his chair. He did not ask which lab. He did not ask what she was testing for. He did not say, what capsules. He said nothing that an innocent person, confused and surprised, would naturally say. 4 seconds, and then a redirection to her credibility. I drove home from Nadia's apartment slowly. I called a lawyer the next morning. His name was Frank Osei, a man I had met through the church we attended irregularly, who worked in civil litigation. I had always liked him, thought him careful and honest. I called him at his office and told him I needed to speak with him as soon as possible about something financial and potentially criminal. He saw me that afternoon. I laid out everything. The folder, the transfers, the missing contract pages, the emails, the handwritten notes, the recording. I talked for nearly an hour without stopping. Frank was quiet through most of it. When I finished, he said, "Don't make any more copies. Don't contact Bernard. Don't discuss this with anyone outside your immediate family yet. Bring me the original documents." I asked him whether he thought Bernard had deliberately harmed Elaine. Frank paused. Then he said, "I think what you've described needs to go to the right people quickly. Whether or not we can prove what was in those capsules, there's enough here for a financial crimes investigation. And a financial crimes investigation will open doors." I brought him everything the next morning. Frank moved faster than I expected. Within 2 weeks, he had connected with a detective at the RCMP's Integrated Market Enforcement Team. IMET handles financial fraud at scale, as well as a detective at the Kelowna RCMP detachment named Sergeant Brenda Forsyth, who was assigned to the case overall. Sergeant Forsyth reviewed everything. She arranged for the lab Elaine had originally contacted to expedite the analysis of any remaining sample, and she submitted a parallel request to the Center of Forensic Sciences in Toronto for independent toxicological analysis of a capsule recovered from the bathroom cabinet in her home, where several had been left in the jar. The results from Toronto came back 7 weeks later. The capsules contained elevated concentrations of hawthorn berry extract combined with a synthetic compound the forensic toxicologist described as structurally similar to a class of substances that at sustained doses can produce cardiac arrhythmia, fatigue, and progressive heart irregularity in otherwise healthy adults. It would present, the report noted, in a way consistent with naturally developing cardiac disease in a person with no prior diagnosis. Elaine had no prior cardiac diagnosis. Her records from before the supplements confirmed this clearly. She'd been taking those capsules every day for 14 months. Bernard Ashton was arrested on a Tuesday morning in March. The charges were fraud over $5,000, theft over $5,000, and after a longer investigation that took nearly a year, criminal negligence causing death. The criminal negligence charge was difficult. The Crown prosecutor, a woman named Sylvie Marchetti, who met with Frank and me twice during the process, was clear that proving causation beyond a reasonable doubt in a case involving a substance that mimics natural disease progression was among the hardest things her office was asked to do. I understood that. I understood it differently than I could emotionally accept it, which is a distinction I have had to sit with for a long time. What the investigation also uncovered, and this is the part I have found hardest to hold, was that Bernard had not acted entirely alone. Elaine's colleague at the school, the one who had originally referred us to Bernard, a man named Stewart, who had taught at the same school as Elaine for 6 years, who had attended her memorial service and stood at the back and cried, had received a referral commission from Bernard for every client he brought in. This was not itself illegal. Financial planners pay referral fees, but the investigation found that Stewart had also provided Bernard with detailed information about our accounts, approximate balances, asset types, Elaine's role as the financially attentive one in the marriage, and had received a secondary payment in cash, routed through a numbered holding company linked to Bernard's wife, around the time the irregular management fees began. Stewart said he hadn't known what Bernard intended to do. He said he had thought Bernard was simply managing the account more aggressively than disclosed, and that any irregularities would be minor. He said he had told himself the money would be recovered in returns and nobody would notice. He said he had not let himself think too carefully about what he was really participating in. I had known Stewart in the way you know a colleague of your spouse's. I had shaken his hand at school events. He had brought food to our house the week after the funeral. When I read Elaine's final handwritten note again, looking for what I had missed the first time, I found it in the margin. Small, written lightly, as though she wasn't sure she wanted it there. I think the referral came from Stewart. I have no proof. I don't know how much he knows. I can't say this to Malcolm without proof because he and Stewart are friendly, and I might be wrong, and I don't want to put that thought in his head if I'm wrong. She had been trying to protect me from incomplete information. She had been sick and frightened and building a case alone in the margins of her own daily life, and she had still stopped to consider whether she might be wrong, still tried to shield me from suspicion that might be unfair. I have thought about that many times. Stewart was charged as an accessory. He pleaded guilty to a reduced charge in exchange for cooperation and testimony. I have not spoken to him since. I do not expect I ever will. There is nothing in me that wants to reach toward that particular conversation, not because of anger exactly. The anger burned off faster than I would have expected, but because I do not know what a conversation between us would be for. I don't have a question for him that I want to hear him answer. Bernard was convicted on the fraud and theft charges. The criminal negligence causing death charge was stayed by the Crown before trial, not for lack of evidence, but because of a gap in the toxicological chain of custody, a storage issue at the initial lab that the defense successfully argued contaminated the evidentiary value of that particular sample. Sylvie Marchetti explained this to Frank and me in her office on a gray afternoon in February. I sat there and listened and understood each word individually and could not make myself absorb the sentence they formed together. That is still true to some extent. Bernard served 22 months at a federal institution. The civil action Frank pursued simultaneously resulted in a settlement, structured, confidential, substantial, that recovered the $74,000 with significant additional damages. On Frank's advice, and following what I knew about Elaine's values, I directed a portion to the cardiac care unit at Kelowna General Hospital. The rest went into a fund Nadia and I set up in her mother's name, attached to the school where Elaine had taught, for students who need financial support during their final year. I still live in the house in Kelowna. Carol Hendricks finished the renovation on the suite and I have tenants there now, a couple from back east, quiet, careful with the space. The property generates income the way Elaine always intended it to. It took me a while to feel anything other than complicated about that. The workshop at the back of the lakeshore property is exactly as Elaine left it. Her photography equipment is still there, her camera bags on the shelf, her light stands folded and leaning against the wall. I've gone in there twice since everything ended. Both times, I stood in the middle of the room and didn't do anything in particular, and then left. I don't know yet what I want to do with it. I am not in a hurry to decide. Nadia calls me every Sunday. She always has. Since her mother died, she calls a little longer than she used to, and she doesn't say that's what she's doing, and I don't say it either. She has her mother's way of listening, the quiet kind that doesn't fill up the space. The letter Elaine left in the envelope was 2 pages, handwritten on paper from the notepad she kept by the phone in the kitchen. I have read it many times. I won't put most of it here because most of it is between us, and it always will be, but there is a passage near the end that I keep returning to. She wrote, "I have spent most of my life trusting people carefully, one reason at a time. You have spent most of yours trusting people generally until they give you a reason not to. I have always loved that about you. I am not asking you to become more like me. I am asking you to know that the people closest to us sometimes make themselves very comfortable in the trust we've already decided to extend. Look a little more carefully at the comfortable ones. Just a little. You don't have to become suspicious. You only have to stay away." I think about that distinction almost every day now, between trust and wakefulness, between faith in people and the particular kind of attention that faith should probably come with. Elaine documented everything she found. She did it carefully, alone, over 14 months, while teaching full-time and managing a rental property, and slowly becoming more unwell in ways she suspected she understood and could not yet prove. She did it without telling me, partly because she needed to be sure and partly because she was trying to protect me from being wrong along with her. She was not wrong. She was precise and patient, and she knew that evidence mattered more than suspicion. And she built a case brick by brick in the margins of her daily life and hid it in a wall and trusted that I would find it one day and know what to do with it. She was right to trust that. I want her to have been right about that. I have made sure of it. There is one more thing I want to say, and then I'm done. The morning I found the box, after Carol left and I was sitting alone in that cold utility room with the envelope in my hands and the work light humming, I looked up at the bracket Elaine had screwed into the stud. It was a simple piece of timber, short, maybe 8 inches, 2 screws on each end. She had measured it carefully. The fit was precise. There was no wobble, no slop, no approximation. She had built a shelf to hold the things she needed held. She had built it right the first time. That was exactly like her. I keep thinking about that bracket Elaine screwed into the wall stud. 8 inches of timber, 2 screws on each side, level and solid. She had measured it. She had done it right. That detail stays with me more than almost anything else from the past 2 years, because it tells me something about the kind of person she was that I already knew, but had perhaps stopped paying close enough attention to. She was meticulous. She was honest. And she was quietly, stubbornly determined to make sure that what she knew would survive her, even when she was running out of time to do anything about it herself. I've spent a lot of time thinking about why things unfolded the way they did. Bernard didn't succeed because he was clever. He succeeded for as long as he did because he understood exactly how trust works between people who have decided in advance that someone is safe. He had been referred by someone we knew. He had managed our accounts for 9 years without incident. He had given Elaine a gift basket and called it wellness. He had positioned himself so thoroughly inside the circle of people we didn't question that questioning him felt like an act of disloyalty to our own judgment. That's how it works. It rarely comes from outside. It comes from inside the circle, wearing the right clothes, using the right words, showing up at the right occasions. What stopped it, what ultimately stopped it, was not luck. It was Elaine's willingness to ask a question she didn't want to have to ask, and then to keep asking it even when the answers were frightening, even when she was becoming more unwell, even when she was doing it entirely alone. She had the clarity to recognize that something was wrong before she had proof it was wrong, and she had the discipline to build the proof patiently instead of acting on instinct alone. That combination, moral seriousness and careful thinking, held together under pressure, is rarer than people admit. And then there is what it cost her to stay silent with me. She knew how close I was to Stuart. She knew that naming him without certainty would damage something real and possibly irreparably. So she wrote it in a margin, lightly, and left the judgment to me for when I had the full picture. That was not weakness. That was a particular kind of integrity that I don't think I fully understood until I read it. I try to carry that now, not the suspicion. I don't want to become suspicious of people, and I don't think Elaine would want that for me either. But the wakefulness, the willingness to look carefully at the people who have made themselves comfortable in our trust, and to take seriously the small things that don't quite add up, even when taking them seriously is inconvenient or uncomfortable. Nadia calls every Sunday. She has her mother's way of listening without filling the silence. I think she is watching out for me in the same careful, unannounced way Elaine always did. I notice it now in a way I didn't used to. I think that noticing is something I owe them both. The suite on Lakeshore is rented again. The tenants are quiet and keep the place well. The workshop at the back is still exactly as Elaine left it. I'm not ready to change it, but I go in sometimes and just stand there. And I think about a woman who built a shelf in a wall and trusted that the right person would eventually find it. She was right to trust that. I made sure of it.